So the prepayment handling is, there's kind of two components to this. There's deposits or prepayments that customers are paying you before you ship the goods to them. And then there's deposits that you're paying to suppliers before they ship the goods to you. So let's start by looking at sort of the administration where the setup is done, and then we'll kind of walk through the actual process of processing the orders themselves. But there's a table in the system called payment terms. And this is where you sort of configure what payment terms constitute prepayments, which do not. So there's a lot to this. And I would say maybe when you're setting this up initially, it's probably best to do this with somebody on the Visco side, your implementation person, or somebody on the support team to assist with this. But once you're set up, you can just go in and make adjustments to it. But so if we look at some examples here, like, okay, so 30/70, for example, where would be, say, in the case of customers sending you 30% deposit or prepayment when the order is placed, and then they're paying the balance, that 70% balance when you ship the goods. So the key is that specifying the prepayment percentage, which is here in this column. And I'll kind of walk through the way that gets processed. And on the purchasing side, it's the same idea. So this one is the sales side, but on the purchasing side, the same idea. We're indicating what the prepayment percentage is there. And then this tells you at what point, what's the trigger on the purchasing side, what's the trigger to create the deposit cost record. So let me walk through an example. We'll start with the sales side. So if I'm creating a new sales order, I'll go into the orders area here, and let's say I want to create a new sales order. And pick a customer, doesn't really matter. Let's say 3 brothers. And I'll choose an item, let's say 3M masks, for example, or respirators. And let's say we're going to do 1,000 of these at $12.78. So the total there is $12,780. So now there's 2 different ways you can create a deposit associated with this. One is just based on the payment terms. So remember we had set up the 30/70 terms where payment terms equal 30%, prepayment 30%, 70%, net 10. So if that's the payment terms, and you've set it up, the structure in the in that payment terms table, then the system will automatically create a prepayment for 30% of the total when you click this button, create prepayment invoice. Now, you don't have to do it that way. That will do a calculation. It'll calculate what the payment amount should be, and it'll create a prepayment invoice as soon as I click that button. Alternatively, if you haven't set up that whole structure in the system tables, and instead you just want to manually type in a deposit amount, you can do that too. I'm just going to switch this back. I'll just show you. Say it's that. In the additional charge, in the additional charge area here, click plus button to add a new charge. And this is where you're going to put the deposit amount. Let's say it's $500. And you're going to choose the charge text as deposit. So now you're going to create it the exact same way. You still click this button, but I'll click it and just show you what happens. So when we click that button, it goes through the process. It says that you created an invoice 11385, and this is going to be a memo invoice in Visco. So no inventory. It's not pulling any of the goods from inventory. It's just a memo invoice that references that sales order, and it has a miscellaneous charge of $500. And then what's going to happen is when the actual sales invoice gets created, the sales invoice will be for the full amount minus the deposit. So it takes the deposit back out. It subtracts it back out. So the total is still the total of the order. So the first invoice is for the deposit amount, and then the sales invoice will take the deposit back off. If that makes sense. So that's on the sales side. Now on the purchasing side it's similar, except that there's no button push. It's all tied directly to those payment terms. So let's say I want to create a purchase order, and I'll select a supplier here. Let's say we choose this Big Fortune Trading, and I'll say we want to buy those masks, N95 respirators. Let's say we're going to do 2,000, and we're going to choose the payment term. So that was called prepayment test, is actually the one we set up. So that's going to be, remember in the system table we set it up, that's a 40% deposit. So the way that gets handled is as soon as the purchase order is issued, so unlike the button push on the sales side that creates the prepayment, in this case it's on the status change to the purchase order. So when the status gets changed to PO issued, so it's basically the order's been confirmed, then same idea, it goes through this little process, and it created a cost batch number 456. So we can look at that. So like in this case, the total for this purchase order was $17,000. So that initial deposit cost should be for 40% of 17,000. So let's go into the finances area and costs. And we can confirm this because there should be a new batch created for 6,800 associated with that purchase order number 8444. That's the one that we just created. So that should be 40% of the total of that purchase order. Now, in this case, what happens is that when the container gets created, because that's what we said, it's a 40% deposit up front, and then the 60% balance is paid when the goods are shipped. So I'm going to go back into this purchase order, and let's say we want to create a container off against this. So create a new container, and I'll go into that container, and let's say we're going to change the status to in transit to reference the fact that, okay, now this container is shipped. So to do that, all I do is put in date in transit, let's say 23rd, and it changes the status to in transit. And then see this record up here tells us that there was a cost batch 457 that gets created. So what it did is it took the total for that PO, and it's going to create a balance invoice. So it takes the deposit off and creates a balance invoice for the difference. And by the way, if there was any changes like to the quantity up or down, so imagine the original purchase order was say for 2,000, but they actually shipped us 2,500. Well, the system adds, it's smart enough to know, okay, well, we paid the deposit of 40%, but really what we want now is the difference plus whatever extra they've shipped us. Or if they short ship, then it does the math in the other direction. But so if I go back into the cost area, you'll see we have, this was the initial deposit cost record that got created for 6,800. And then there's a second batch that gets created for 10,200, which is the 60% balance that got shipped later on. So again, these would exist in Visco only as pending cost records until you click that button, and that pushes those cost records over to QuickBooks.